if it had not used religion and not said that this is a wrong interpretation, instead of just saying that it is wrong, period, being able to mobilize or to become as important as it did become.
Well, maybe to some extent we had to do that because we cannot totally disregard the importance of religion. But what we have achieved out of it, I'm not really sure. Look, we have mobilized people more or less on human rights issues. Like the case of Safia Bibi, when a blind woman was had to be lashed and given a sentence of 10 lashes or what. So it became more or less a human rights issue, not a religious issue.
But even then, if you remember using this very case, since you brought up the example of the Safia Bibi case, eventually we won the case.
Yes.
She won the case, I mean, we as the women's movement. But she won it by using Quranic law. In other words, she won it because it was eventually, because the law, the Hudud ordinance said that you needed 4 male witnesses, and there weren't 4 male witnesses, and even the fact that she was pregnant, the ultimate judgment was that even pregnancy is not proof of adultery if you don't have those 4 male witnesses. In other words, the case was still fought on the Islamic wicket. And even other cases, like not other cases but other issues, like the law of evidence was diffused from the initial statement that 2 women's evidence is equal to 1 man, and then eventually was passed in a watered down way. Because the women's movement said that this is a wrong interpretation. Don't you think that the women's movement, by raising these issues, was able to confuse, or not confuse, cause a debate of what is in the interpretation of Islam, and that also that there is no one interpretation, that things can be interpreted in different ways? It did trigger off a debate on Islam which had never existed before. Is there something positive, at least in that there is no one view, one interpretation?
Yes, it did trigger off the debate. To that extent, it was positive. And we also won all these cases, in fact, on the same grounds. Because if it was a Muslim law, then it had to be challenged on the same lines, what we did in the Sharia codes. But you see, the problem comes when, take this example of when only last week, Sharia code, this judgment came in against us. It was decided, the majority of the bench decided that not only, even the 4 female witnesses will not be enough for the had punishment of murder and all that. So if we are fighting on the religious grounds, then where do we go from there?
But if those are the courts that are deciding this,
Yes.
then aren't we forced to fight on the religious ground? Because if something goes to the Sharia bench, even now, us challenging the Hudud ordinance, we're having to challenge it by Sharia, by actually locating it within Islamic tradition. We can't fight it on the human rights issue because it goes into a different court.
That is the whole thing. You see, we are being forced to do that. And some of us feel that there's no other option but to take the same grounds as we are fighting against the Islamic laws or so-called Shariat laws and in the Shariat codes. So we have to fight them on the Islamic lines, giving the same arguments that Islam, the interpretation is not this or it's not that, things like that. But beyond that, one gets stuck, what to do?
But the left tried to mobilize people on only economic issues and
They
didn't
did not
actually
succeed.
got anywhere. To that extent, the women's movement got further because it remained closer to the culture and identity of the people. Now, I know there are problems in that, but there is also a lesson in that if you stay outside it, you can become more marginalized.
No, but the question is that if you stay close to the culture, is it necessary that you stay near to the religion as well, close to the religion as well?
But then one gets into this issue of what is culture and what
And what
is
is
religion.
religion?
How would you make this distinction?
It's a bit tricky.
Yes, it is very
It's a
tricky,
bit,
huh?
it's a
Because
bit
you don't know what comes from what.
Yes.
So how would you see that difference?
I feel that we don't have to hurt people unnecessarily. And but we don't have to fight our battle on religious grounds as well.
But by just raising economic issues, do you think we can mobilize?
By raising economic issues and by raising the human rights issues. I mean, these are the popular issues.
But then why does the left not do well? We've been trying as left for years, just using economic and human rights issues, and have not been able to mobilize. In fact, are very alienated from the people. The left is.
Yes, because I think they didn't go close to the people. And they didn't pick up their issues. For example, the women's issue. It was never picked up by left. Till women themselves picked up their own issue and started talking about women's rights. In the same way, there were so many issues which were important to people, and left never took it up. So I think they had.
But culture and nationality, even religion, is important to people. Very important sometimes.
Yes, it is.
And one may have to perhaps use those maybe better images, more positive images, because that is what people relate to. We may have to use them. I mean, can religion ever be can one use religion as a subversive activity, the more liberating aspects? Can we subvert or use it for subversion of, say, a theocratic state and use it against that?
Something like liberation theology,
Yes. Is that possible in Islam?
Well, it is possible if people come out with the modern interpretation of Islam. But that too contains so much rigidity. I see a lot of limitations within that purview also. That at least in Islamic history, we had no such example. I'm talking. When I say this, my focus is women's movement, because maybe when we are fighting against state or against dictatorship, then Islam can play an important role, a radical role. But when it comes to women's issues and women's movement, I'm doubtful.
But say when you say liberation theology, we don't have something like that in the Islamic tradition. But we have a Sufi tradition. Now, some of the Sufis, of course, were acknowledged the state and were even patronized by the state. But there were many others in Pakistan, I mean in what is now geographically Indian, Pakistan, which were very large movements, people's movements, against the theocracy, against the mullah, and sometimes even against the state. I mean, Shah Hussain certainly had a different relationship to the state and challenge the state in a very large movement. In fact, almost like new left movements is something, and so we have had in Islamic history something like this, a tradition of this. In Iran, Shariati, I know it was not at a large scale, but Shariati did have a following. Not that I believe totally in Shariati, I think there are many problems in that, but we have not, if there were interpretations like that, radical interpretations, perhaps do you see the possibility at all of movements that could take on the state and yet stay within Allah, the framework of Allah, and at least some relationship with the Quran?
One could do that, but as I told you earlier, the take on the state is a different thing, because I'm not really familiar with Sufis, what they had to say about women.
No, on women they were very negative.
So you see,
but meaning that
I'm talking from a feminist.
Suppose there's a new
I am talking
Sufi,
from
a woman Sufi or a new Sufi.
A feminist perspective. One could fight against state or against a ruler using Islam or the Sufi traditions and all that. But when it comes to women, I'm 100% sure that the scope is very much limited in Islam. Even if it is a very, very liberal interpretation of Islam, we do not stand many chances.
So coming back to the issue, do you believe still in this power or God or something that is larger than human beings?
Yes.
You do. Is this spirit Allah?
Not in the Islamic sense. Bhagwan, Allah, God.
A power. And the Quran, is it the word of God?
Well, I think it's a book, not necessarily
a message,
message.
Not a literal thing. So one can have a relationship with this God and not necessarily with the Quran.
Yes, that I believe. It is not through Quran. My relationship with that power is not through Quran.
Culturally, do you feel like, sometimes I get the feeling that, sometimes as you were saying, I get the feeling that I am culturally a Muslim, that there are certain historical, not with the Middle East and whatever, but with Iran, Bukhara, etc., because there's a historical tradition there. But I also feel, as you were saying, close to India, I feel culturally actually very little difference between a Hindu who may be living 10 miles away from me and myself, with the 5,000 years of history. How do you respond, coming back to that culture and tradition thing? Is it religion that makes culture, or culture that makes religion? Or?
I think religion is one of the aspects. You can say that it's one aspect, but it is the common history, heritage, language, traditions, the wars which we fought together, and art, literature, music. There's so many things which make culture, and religion is just one aspect of it. So I think it is just not the religion which makes culture.
And yet today in Pakistan, people seem to have, culture and religion have become very mixed. and very tied up, and people have forgotten. In fact, if you tell even a fairly educated Pakistani that your culture is more Hindu and Buddhist than it's Islamic, they will be quite upset by this.
Yes, they'll react.
Yes, they'll react to it. They'll think it's Muslim. So in that context, how do you see the future in our movement? Coming back to that question, do we need to, because people see culture as religion, does one need to address oneself to Islam?
Well, that is a dilemma, you see, because as I told you earlier, that we just cannot totally disregard the importance of religion, because it is important to the majority of people. But how do we use it so that we are not caught up in this rigmarole of religious debates and all that? We haven't discussed it as yet. I'm talking about the women activists in the women's movement, and to what extent we can strategically use religion to go forward, and when should we stop using it? Where should we stop using it? There should be a cut-off point.
But Anis, for instance, Anjuman Jamhuriyat Pasand Khawateen was formed in 1948. From 1948 to 1981, we had barely heard of it, and it was raising the women's issue and the economic issue, which the left was not doing, but Anjuman was doing. And even at the end of these 30 years, I think the membership couldn't have been more than 20 or 30. With WAF and the new movement and really raising the issue and taking it somewhere else and more in the cultural and even religious tradition, WAF made the women's movement, and I don't want necessarily to take credit, but it shifted ground. The women's movement from 81 did take a different turn and became much more widespread, and the women's issue has, whether we like it or not, or Jamaat likes it or not, from the left, from the right, from the center, become a national issue. Everyone talks about the women's issue, every party has women in their manifesto, good or bad, whether we like it or not. WAF made a greater impact then and was able to mobilize more women, and more women identified with it. Then with an Anjuman which raised women's issues and raised the economic issue, but stayed away from the religion and Islamic tradition, etc.
Well, I think perhaps as far as
it may be disturbing, but it's
as
a
far
fact.
as the success of WAF goes, I think that it was the right political decision taken at the right moment. If we had started this movement 10 years ago, we might not have got the same response. Whether it was thought that way or not, but it was a political decision. And the objective condition was such that it was a correct decision.
And now how do you feel? The laws are still there, but that big enemy, that clear enemy, the military, Ziaul Haq, Islamization, that is not there. Yet the laws are there. There is an aura, a reality, a society that is into religion, etc. How do you feel? What do you think the women's movement now? On what wicket, or how do we strategize?
I think it should be issue-based, and we should keep on picking up the issues and pressurizing.
But if the issue is religion, which it is, all the laws that are being passed and the laws we want to be annulled and taken away are all religious laws.
Yes, but we have already taken this position that all these laws must be repealed. So issue is religion, but our stand has been very, very clear.
But we have not taken the stand as well that we do not want Shariat at all. We have not taken that stand categorically.
But we have taken a stand against Shariat bill.
Against that particular bill
Yes.
which was passed by Ziaul Haq. But we have not taken a stand that we do not want our laws, our country to be governed by the Shariat.
I think that will just be a one step forward, and we haven't reached to any consensus, but if the need be.
But do you think the time, the moment, the political moment is right when we can take that stand? Because in Lahore, for example, this debate is going on, and some of us are saying, let's now just categorically take that stand. Others are saying, no, when it comes up, we'll talk about it, we'll try and diffuse it, we'll try and play with it, we'll try and soften it. Some others are saying, let's now just come out and say the country should not be governed by the Shariat and take a categorical stand. How do you feel the time is right for that?
That's a very, very important question.
We've had
Very,
two
very,
meetings
very,
actually in Lahore on this issue.
Very crucial. So we haven't discussed it, but some of us also feel that if we cannot take a secular position now, then we'll never be able to raise this issue. So this is the time that WAF should take, or we should take this stand, that country should not be governed by Shariat or Islamic law. It should be a secular state. And I'm not sure that it's going to be a popular demand, a popular issue. But we have been picking up unpopular issues. Sometimes in a movement you have to do that.
And for the long term.
And perhaps if not now, then later, we have to do that.
Later may be even worse.
Well,
meaning that if, say, the next party wins or the next round comes in, we may never be able to take it.
yes.
That's why the debate is occurring now.
Yes, in terms of women's movement, I think we have to take this stand. Because I still maintain my position that there's not much scope if we fight our battle within the purview of Islam. Somewhere or the other we get stuck, and we have to accept that position.